Brill. Hello, everybody. As mentioned, I am a last-minute substitution. Let's hope a little bit more success than last night's substitutions. Anyone had the misfortune of watching that game. But I am Ryan from SkyParlour, a specialist FinTech PR company based in Manchester. I'm glad to say my panel is as billed, Dave, Farooq, and Aseem. So thank you for joining me, gents. I think before we start, maybe everyone wanted to just quickly introduce themselves and what's brought them here today.
No worries, thanks Ryan, and thanks again for stepping in. You are no doubt a better substitution than the aforementioned. My name's Dave Gardner. I'm a partner at TLT, based in the Manchester office here. I'm head of FinTech practice, and I'm a technology IP and data lawyer, so I'm very interested in all things FinTech. I'm delighted to be joined by colleagues on the panel today.
Thank you. Thanks, Ryan, and thanks, Dave. So I'm Farooq Ansari. I'm a client partner at Softwire, and we're a tech consultancy. I'm based in the Manchester office. We obviously have a London office as well, and one in Cambridge, but I'm interested in all things Manchester and all things tech, so really excited to be part of this panel.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thanks for calling me Ryan. I'm Aseem Pahuja. I'm a lecturer in FinTech. My research mostly deals with blockchains and cryptocurrencies, and of late, generative AI. So very excited to be on the panel. Thank you.
Great stuff. So I think our panel today is obviously what's happening now in FinTech in the Northwest and obviously here in Manchester. I think we all can agree it's been a period of much success for Manchester and the Northwest, in FinTech for the last few years. There's some reports that the Northwest FinTech ecosystem now contributes, I think it's £1 billion or £100 billion to the broader sort of national economy, and now employs up to 10,000 people. But I guess what we want to know is there's other things happening in FinTech right now. There's a bit of a constrained investment environment. So as we sit here today, I guess in your guys' opinions, what is the state of play FinTech in the Northwest? And then if you want to maybe start, Dave.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. There has been a lot of success, as you say, and a lot of the research now pretty clearly positions Manchester as the second city for FinTech outside of London. And there's a huge amount of benefits to working and exploring and developing FinTech in Manchester. We've just heard from the universities. Already today we'll hear more from them. That's a massive strength. We've also got a fantastic advisory community and ecosystem where there's huge expertise that can help FinTechs to grow and can help customers to collaborate effectively with technology providers. I do think there's still some constraints. Obviously the broader economic headwinds and huge amounts of political and economic disruption and change at the moment are putting a brake on investment, and a lot of investment is still probably more London-centric than Northwest startups and scale-ups would like it to be. But I do still think there's a massive opportunity here, and there's a huge amount of activity going on based out of the Northwest, which long may that continue.
Yeah, I'd mirror exactly what Dave said. I think Manchester, to an extent, I think, has now become mature enough that it's almost like a microcosm of the broader economy, the UK economy and the global economy. So I think we've grown up enough that people don't think about Manchester as being this kind of unique little thing. From our perspective, we work with everyone from startups to big enterprise organizations. And again, Manchester reflects that. So, we've got a couple of really interesting FinTech startups as part of our client portfolio. At the other end of the scale, we've worked with people like Sterling Bank, who are now based in Manchester. There's, the major banks have a presence. There's a whole load of innovation. I think it's worth mentioning there's a really cool startup scene here as well. So whether it's like, people like Access Pay, I believe they've just got a good round of investment, and people like that are really good standard bearers for the Manchester scene. So yeah, there's uncertainty, but there's uncertainty everywhere. I think Manchester's as good a place as any, if not better than most.
Other than the industry engagement, Manchester is also leading the way in FinTech research, and the Center for FinTech Studies is doing quite well. We are publishing in the highest journals, getting awards, consulting governments, like the government of Oman and stuff. So a lot on the research front. Manchester is also leading.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I can ask a slightly pointed question then, I mean, as you guys have mentioned, you know, it has been a good period in the last few years, but in the broader fintech, you know, sector, it's also been positive. So, you know, one of the things I wonder, is this a case of a rising tide has lifted all boats and Manchester has kind of, you know, succeeded as a result of that, or is there something, I guess, intrinsic to Manchester that, you know, has made it sort of, you know, makes it well suited to fintech and sort of a strong fintech ecosystem?
It's a good question. I think there's definitely been a buzz around fintech, and it's definitely had that hype around it for several years, probably running into maybe a year or two ago. And then with economic headwinds, there's been a lot more of a challenge. So it's harder to access investment, not just in the Northwest, but generally. I think businesses are being put to task to demonstrate they've got a genuine, profitable product to sell, rather than just looking to grow customers and looking to grow market share. So that's certainly a challenge. But I think from a Manchester perspective, there are so many great attributes of this city and the city region. When we look at the universities, we look at the transport connections, the airports, we look at the football clubs, again, to return to those, and the cultural institutions that sit around Manchester. And as I say, that community and that group of advisors and connected people who can really add some value. So Manchester definitely has had the benefit of some of the amount of capital and the amount of investment and focus on fintech over the last few years. But what's important is to build something that's sustainable and that continues so that the tide doesn't roll out again. I think Manchester's well placed to continue to prosper. And I guess it's unlocking some of those challenges around what is still a slightly London-centric view of the market, although that's changing, that's improved, and it's certainly something where we've made great strides, and Manchester's probably ahead of a lot of other non-London locations.
And Farooq, I know you were born in Manchester and then you moved away to London and now you're obviously back here. So taking a sort of a step back with a slightly longer term perspective, you know, in your lifetime, what would you say have been the biggest changes about this city?
There've been a lot of changes. I'm kind of old enough to remember, so like the Manchester days where, and I won't talk about the hacienda because everyone talks about it, but yeah, I think there's been so many factors that have contributed, and I agree with everything that Dave said. I think the regeneration of Manchester was well timed in that it's kind of broadly in sync with so many big things that are happening in tech as well. So to an extent, we were unencumbered by legacy tech in Manchester. We had the opportunity to start again. We've got the universities, obviously, so there's a great pool of talent and there's a lot of excellent research and, you know, world-class research that's happening here. And I think that over the last 10 or 20 years, you've seen lots of these factors coming together. So even 10 or 15 years ago, the tech scene in Manchester you had lots of agencies, lots of very good agencies. Now, all the big consultancies are here, but you've also got people like Booking.com with a significant presence. You've got Auto Trader with massive in-house teams. You've got the BBC and Media City, and you've got ITV there. So you have a really mature economy that takes in everything from a really vibrant startup scene to massive established multinationals doing their big enterprisey things and everything in between. And we have a pool of talent that services all of those. And you could probably talk a little bit about Manchester's spirit of innovation, you know, the fact that the world's first computer was invented here. Turing spent time here. As a post-industrial city, we were well placed, I think, to reinvent ourselves. And now you talk about Manchester in the same breath as you do not just London, but Berlin and New York as well. So we're in a good place. And I think the compactness of Manchester it really kind of engenders a sense of community. Like, I worked in London for 10 years and there's lots going on there and they've got lots of money, but you don't have the same sense of community and togetherness and focus and direction.
So Aseem, if I can turn to you and use a relatively vague phrase, in the last decade has Manchester and the Northwest in general leveled up?
Of course, yeah. I mean, Ken just spoke before me, and we have a nice entrepreneur encouraging scene. There are quite a few ways in which the startups can really prosper here. So yeah, in that sense, it has leveled up.
Right.
And we have Manchester has always been non-conformist and a little on the scene, so yeah.
I think what we all agree on is FinTech in general is entering a new stage of maturation. You know, FinTech was once, you know, it was new, it was nascent, and now it's, you know, a real fundamental part of a lot of our lives and the infrastructures that help to run our lives. Dave, I could turn to you. I mean, with that sort of maturation, you know, some people would say there's now added pressures or new pressures on FinTech, and one of them would be regulations, greater regulatory oversight. I wonder if you agree with that, and maybe if you could talk about how that's impacting FinTech and whether that is impacting companies' ability to maybe be as innovative as they were in the past.
It's a really big question, but I'll give it a go. Yeah, I think FinTech and the maturity you allude to is right, and that goes to businesses being put to proof on their profitability or their sustainability rather than speculative investment when investment is scarcer. In terms of the regulatory aspects, there's undoubtedly a fairly steady stream, if not deluge, of regulations that are specific to the financial services sector that all FinTech participants need to think about, whether they're the regulated customer who is heavily regulated and buying the service or working with a FinTech provider, or whether it's a startup or scale-up working out how they can effectively sell their services and work with businesses that will demand lots from them. So we could go into detail about the regulations, which I won't, but just to name a few, you've got the FCA's consumer duty, you've got operational resilience requirements coming out of the EU, but also corresponding consultation in the UK, which is going to include regulation of non-FS third parties, critical third parties. You've also got ongoing requirements to comply with outsourcing rules and critical contracts rules when you're working with third parties if you're a regulated FS business. And then the general wrappers of GDPR, data protection, and the ways in which you need to think about that much more carefully if you're looking at deploying AI, which we might come on to in a moment or two. So all of that you could see as, well, it's certainly a lot of cognitive compliance load for those who are responsible for that compliance to bear, and they need good advice to be able to navigate through it. But in all those cases, those things don't necessarily need to be a constraint to innovation, and they're certainly not intended to be from a regulator's perspective. Things like consumer duty, looking after your customers, things like operational resilience, making sure that your business can withstand external shocks, which undoubtedly will come along and are a reality for all large organisations at risk from cyber threats and other supply chain issues that could cause them to face difficulties. GDPR, protect your customers' data. At heart, all of these are themes that align with good business practice, and actually there's an opportunity to make sure you are not only compliant but also using those instruments as a springboard to make sure that you are delivering a better service for your customers and working in a more sustainable organisation, which has got to be positive. And if you look at, for example, what Apple has done with something like data privacy, which for an organisation like Apple and the pervasive way in which Apple looks at your data, appreciate that Apple aren't quite a FinTech, although they kind of are around the edges. Apple have made a massive virtue of their privacy compliance and made that a differentiator and a USP. There's a huge billboard just outside our office which says the Safari, a truly private browser. So I think it's an opportunity for businesses to get this right and to use it as a positive. But that's not to make it sound like it's all straightforward. You do need to think about it carefully. You need to have quite a targeted and tailored approach, and we can help and advise on that. But a lot of these regulations at heart have got positive outcomes embedded within them.
I guess just before we do move on to sort of discussing new technologies, you know, previously we had that era of the move fast, break things. Is it safe to say that that's over, or do you?
I think it depends on scale in some respects. I think if you're doing a proof of concept, if you've got early stage businesses, or you've got an idea, again, the regulations are not, and the regulators are not there to absolutely stop you. Things like the FCA Sandbox program, you know, gives you a safe space in which to innovate. And if you do things safely, you test them on small amounts of customers or test on dummy data. There's various ways in which you certainly can still innovate. But yeah, I certainly think the concept of a customer-wide rollout of something brand new that hasn't really been carefully analysed and interrogated, that probably does still happen. But if it ever was a good idea, it certainly isn't a good idea or a prudent way to operate in the current environment.
Yeah. Farooq, do you agree with that?
I fully agree with moving fast and breaking things. I think that's like an underlying principle that leads to innovation. I think it's something that a lot of people who work in tech are excited by that. That's probably why we got into tech in the first place. At the same time, I totally appreciate the importance of regulations.
This is why I'm a lawyer.
Yeah, exactly, which is great. But I think, particularly at enterprise level, it's different when you're a startup, but even then, if you're seeking funding, you don't want to break things too much or break things too badly. But we have clients who innovate a lot all the time. They have specific units dedicated to innovation. They also have a culture of innovation, but they're also massive, and they're global, they're transnational. I think it's possible to reconcile the two. I agree with Dave that I think the ultimate objective of all these regulations is ultimately good. You know, they're after good things. It's important to have regulations. It's important to have privacy. It's important to have governance around data, but I don't think that impedes innovation. I think it just makes us more focused to innovate correctly in the right areas and in the right way.
Great. So we're going to turn our attentions now to new technologies, which includes, drum roll please, AI, which I think may have been brought up so far. But Aseem, if I can start from you, and obviously you can give an academic perspective on this. How should we be thinking, how should we be framing the potential of AI? You know, is this simply a technological advancement, or is this something much bigger that will, you know, a societal change?
So, generative AI and GPT 4.0 and stuff, they are in a continuum from GPT 1 to 4. Just that it has become so good that we are seeing that it's an exponential improvement, but essentially it's not. It's a linear improvement. The performance has become so good that we are noticing it now. It used to be a lot of prediction using AI algorithms. Now the next step is, of course, generation, and we are right at that continuum. So people who are in the business of AI innovation, they know that it's not that exponential. It's just that the product is so easy to use. It has very high adoption now that people have suddenly started taking notice outside of the AI research domain. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah. I think I know all three have sort of had your own experiences using these technologies. So, you know, certain things you maybe can and can't say, but I guess in a general sense, you know, how are you implementing these services sort of in your daily work?
Me? So internally, there's a lot of interest in terms of how we can use things like Copilot for our engineers to improve operational efficiency. I think there's a lot of stuff. There is, I think, a well-argued rationale for AI, which is that it augments human activities, and we've seen that play out both internally and externally. So AI is hugely interesting for us. We started working on generative AI, and it's important to differentiate generative AI and AI. So AI has been with us since probably the late 50s, and people have been using AI without even necessarily knowing that they've been using AI. Generative AI is the new shiny thing because of ChatGPT. As far as generative AI is concerned, because I think that is the new shiny thing that everyone's talking about, so we started working in that field probably about 3.5, 4 years ago, before ChatGPT came into the public consciousness. So we actually have a couple of products that people are actually using, that our clients' customers are using. And we found it hugely transformational. They found it hugely transformational as well. So there's a whole load of stuff I can't yet talk about because we're NDA'd. But we have a client called Tax Systems. They do, as the name implies, they do tax systems for FTSE 100, 250 clients. And they came to us. And there's a good example of where you can actually productionize it. And they said, is there a way for generative AI to help us and bring value? So we sat down and we talked about use cases. And I think a lot of this is about validating and identifying use cases, because otherwise you're just wasting lots of money on a vanity project. And we built an LLM that sits on an open AI model, GPT 3.5 in this case, made it really secure in their wider Azure framework. And what this does is, it doesn't sound hugely exciting, but it is really cool. It takes inputs from a company's balance sheet and it reclassifies them using generative AI in accordance with HMRC tax classification brackets. And that is something that would normally take 3 or 4 junior accountants a couple of days, and they'd come back with something that was maybe 80% accurate. After about 2 or 3 weeks of training our LLM, it takes 20 minutes, and we get accuracy of between 90 and 95%, which is fantastic because it's a better experience for the client, there are better margins for the company, and those poor junior accountants that have to do this, they can do more interesting, higher value work. So, and I think that's just one. We have others coming, hopefully, over the next few months. But it's a good example of generative AI kind of making life better for humans, as well as just making things cooler, I think, from a tech perspective.
Yeah, Dave, you...
Yeah, for sure. So we've been working with AI in various ways, making that distinction again between generative and old AI, as we might need to start calling it, which seems a bizarre concept. We've been working with AI as part of our service offering to clients for over a decade, so using contract review tools, document analysis, sifting contracts to find key legal issues. We launched a product called Legal Sifter about 7 years ago, which does that, and which still does that, and works very well. So we've integrated that into our business. We've got a very active future law team as part of our team, which works with us on legal matters and also provides technology solutions as well. I suppose looking externally is where it's perhaps more interesting, because that's where clients are now asking us about AI, and in particular generative AI. And in the financial services fintech space, what I've observed is just a massive range of maturity, and that goes to the video from just before the session about looking at your maturity as an organisation when you're considering AI. There are clients where we've literally been asked to put together materials and presentations about what AI is, because understandably it's a new area, they're nervous about it, they don't want to, they're perhaps nervous about getting too deep into something before they're ready to do so. And then we've got clients who are now asking us very specific questions about how they can analyse the adoption of AI within the business, how they can ensure they're compliant with the EU AI Act provisions around certain transparency obligations to their customers, and then very specific use cases about marketing materials, HR, generating content, writing software documentation, coding. So we're getting into the weeds of really deep questions. We're also now advising investors and FS institutions who are looking to invest in and partner with startups and scale-ups, where they're creating large language models for specific purposes, and those organisations are looking to both invest and potentially get a return from a broader success of that new service, but also use it themselves because they see they want to be the first customer of that service. So real appetite to get into this and to do something tangible. And then we've got at the very end of the spectrum certain clients who have probably discovered under the radar somewhat that their technology teams have started to do things that they perhaps weren't fully aware of. And those are actually now raising questions and concerns about how have we looked at this from a risk perspective, from a data governance perspective, all the things that have been spoken about on the previous panel. And we're involved in trying to make sure that we're formalising things sometimes after the fact. So wherever clients are on that journey now, we're starting to receive instructions and talk to people about it. So it absolutely is, it's a real thing that's happening, as well as being the latest hyped issue where you will potentially increase your multiplier if you put it in your deck if you're looking for investment. But there's a heck of a lot of real activity going on as well, which is really good to see.
Aseem, I wonder, from your perspective, if you're a business in the Northwest that's starting out, how would you recommend that they approach AI, the concept, and determining how to integrate it within their business?
So let's look at what generative AI capabilities are. If you can just divide the skills into verbal and quant, it's not so great at quant, but it's exceptional at verbal. And the research has shown that if you are a consultant, if you remember what Farooq and Dave said, Farooq said, junior accountants. So it's great at upskilling people who are at a junior level, but it might stifle the progress of an expert accountant, perhaps. So if you are, say, onboarding new clients, you can use Gen AI to upskill them or make them up par. But the thing here is that experts don't require it. It really is a augmentation tool for now. We are still far away from automation. So assist, augment, automate, and assistance, it was doing quite well. It has started doing augmentation, producing code. We don't usually do end-to-end coding, but it is writing snippets, which we can include. We are a little far away from augmentation, but we will soon reach there. So use it as an onboarding tool, use it for help desks, use it for personalization. A lot of you have clients and sales agents. If you want to personalize your sales proposal for a client, you can use it for that. That way, it can help at least the startups.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that in terms of that assistive use case rather than something that's autonomous.
Yeah.
I think certainly in the professional services and the financial services context, that's where most of the current use cases are, because there's that recognition that there is a need for human oversight and there's a need for some decision-making and analysis, which is currently beyond the capabilities of an AI tool to do accurately, safely, without bias. And picking up on some of the themes from the previous panel about, is this something that is a threat to jobs and to job roles? The way which we've always looked at AI from a TLT internal perspective and working with our clients has been primarily assistive and providing the ability for people in job roles to do the more interesting stuff and more quickly cut to the chase, get the data, have it presented, and then do that analysis rather than what's more mechanistic and process-driven. I'm not sure that's the case across all industries, and there's definitely a broader economic and societal conversation to be had around that. But most of the use cases from an FS perspective, it's about we can do more, do it better, do it quicker, and actually give opportunities for more roles for people to look at this information and analyse the outputs. And therefore, it's an addition rather than a replacement.
One of the things we've spoke about in the past is it's, maybe at the moment an enhancement, not a replacement, but I guess it's how long, that stays, the case. I know we're sort of coming towards the end of our time, so if we sort of circle back now to the, the Northwest and FinTech, we've obviously discussed, how many positive things there are going on, and, we don't want to really delve into the negatives, but I guess if we look at additional support for the Northwest, for the FinTech ecosystem, I just wonder, if you guys have any thoughts on maybe what can be done to ensure that the Northwest sort of continues this momentum it has at the moment. Dave, do you want to start?
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, sorry, I've got just a very brief one. I think coming back to that issue of investment from previous Pro-Manchester events and FinTech events, that's something that comes up time and again and has been written about in the press. And I do wonder if there's an opportunity for something like CFIT, who've just announced their second coalition into economic crime, having already tackled open finance. An organisation like that that's set up on the back of the Khalifa review into FinTech UK-wide, whether there's room there for something more where we can talk about how we rebalance that investment landscape, work together as non-London centres of excellence in FinTech around the UK. Maybe that would be a useful avenue to look at.
Yeah. Farooq?
Yeah, I think there's still work to be done on levelling up, for sure. And stuff like this is a really important part of raising the profile of Manchester. At the same time, we mentioned before, we've had this influx over the last 10, 20 years of big names, and at the same time, that's been matched by a lot of startup activity and innovation in the university space, etc. We've got a whole load of students. I think Manchester should kind of keep on doing what it's doing, to be honest with you. I was talking to a client who's based in Berlin on Friday and last week, and they're talking about opening up a new FinTech business in the UK, and he said that Manchester was the first name that came up on the list in terms of not only himself, he's founded several businesses and exited, so he kind of knows the landscape, but the interesting thing was his team of developers said they'd rather be based in Manchester than in London. Now, we all know this. That's
Sure, it sounds
clearly
fair.
the case, right? Who wouldn't say that?
Yeah.
But it's interesting that that message is now kind of permeating more widely across Europe and across the Channel as well. So I spent some time at a startup in Manchester called Blake Mill, and they make really good shirts. I don't work there anymore, but I thought. But their founder is a Canadian guy who worked in a fintech in Frankfurt, exited and came to Manchester, didn't even think about London. So there's all these great stories that show that Manchester is already on the map. And yeah, long may it continue. And I think, apart from the levelling up issue, which hopefully will improve, I think there's the biggest constraint is just what's happening on a global economic level. So we're subject to the same troubles as everyone else, but at least it is just that.
Very good. Aseem, I would ask you, but I think we might just be out of time. So if anyone wants Aseem's answer, please make sure you get him down somewhere and hunt him down and ask him. And I'll give you that insight. But yeah, I think that is us. So yeah, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you so much, guys, for your participation.
That's right.
Stage left.